Texas, 1887. A time when the West was still wild, fortunes were made in cattle, and lonely men sent for brides they'd never met. For Eleanor Hayes, a Boston seamstress with dreams bigger than her prospects, a mail-order marriage represented her last chance at a life beyond poverty and ridicule. What she never expected was to step off a train into a town's cruel judgment, facing mockery for her fuller figure, or that the wealthiest cattle baron in 3 counties would claim her as his bride despite the jeers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the remarkable true story of how one woman's courage in the face of cruelty transformed not just her own life, but an entire town's understanding of love, worth, and true strength of character. The sewing needle flashed in the dim light, driven by Eleanor Hayes's skilled fingers as she worked to finish the alteration before daylight faded completely. Her small rented room in Boston's South End offered poor illumination even at noon. By early evening, it was a battle against encroaching shadows. Still, after 12 years as a seamstress, Eleanor could nearly stitch by touch alone. At 32, her hands showed the wear of her profession. Tiny puncture scars, calluses on her fingertips, skin dried from constant contact with fabrics. And dyes. These hands had created ball gowns for debutantes, wedding dresses for hopeful brides, mourning clothes for widows. They had crafted garments for every significant moment in other women's lives, while Eleanor's own life remained largely unchanged since she'd apprenticed at 20. She paused, stretching fingers that had grown stiff, and glanced at the newspaper, clipping propped against her oil lamp. The advertisement had grown worn at the creases from repeated handling over the past month. Wife wanted. Successful cattle rancher, 38. Seeks respectable, practical woman of good character for matrimony. Must be willing to relocate to Texas. Domestic skills valued over beauty. Photograph appreciated but not required. Write to J. Worthington, Box 217, Clearwater, Texas. Eleanor had answered dozens of similar advertisements over the years, receiving few replies and no serious offers. At first, she had included a photograph, her round face composed into what she hoped was an expression of gentle dignity. The rejections had been swift, occasionally cruel. Eventually, she stopped sending her likeness, focusing instead on her virtues, her skills as a seamstress, her education, her careful management of her modest finances, her good health despite her size. James Worthington had been different. His letters, 3 exchanged over 2 months, had been direct but kind, intelligent, without pretension. He asked practical questions about her tolerance for hard work and isolation, her expectations of marriage, her hopes for the future. Never once did he inquire about her appearance. In his final letter, tucked safely in Eleanor's travel case, he had written, "I believe we might suit each other well, Miss Hayes. If you are agreeable, I have enclosed funds for your passage to Clearwater. I will meet you at the station on the first Tuesday of April. If upon meeting you decide against our arrangement, I give my word as a gentleman to provide return fare to Boston without question or complaint." It had seemed a fair offer, more than fair given Eleanor's circumstances. Her landlady had recently announced an increase in rent. The dressmaker's shop where she worked had lost customers to the new department store. Boston winters grew harder to endure with each passing year, and beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper truth. Eleanor Hayes was lonely, aching for something beyond her solitary existence of work and sleep and the occasional Sunday service where she sat alone in the back pew. Now, her trunk was packed, her few affairs settled. Tomorrow's train would carry her west, toward an unknown future with a man she had never seen, Fear and hope warred within her as she completed the final stitches on her best dress, let out slightly for comfort during the long journey, neckline modified to flatter her full figure as much as possible. Knock at her door startled her. She set aside her sewing and rose to answer it, finding her landlady's daughter, Martha, in the hallway. "Package came for you, Miss Hayes," the girl said, holding out a small parcel. "From Texas." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Thank you, Martha." When the door closed, she unwrapped the package with careful fingers. Inside lay a small silver brooch shaped like a rose and a brief note for your journey. "May it remind you that beauty thrives even in the harshest landscapes." J.W. Eleanor pinned the brooch to her collar with trembling hands. The first gift she had received in years. The gesture touched her deeply, suggesting a sensitivity she had not dared to hope for in her prospective husband. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with endless train journeys, faceless strangers, and vast empty landscapes. She woke before dawn, dressed in her freshly altered traveling suit, and secured her hair in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. The mirror reflected a woman with warm brown eyes, flushed cheeks, and a figure that had long been the source of whispers and sidelong glances. Eleanor lifted her chin and straightened her shoulders. Whatever awaited her in Clearwater, Texas, she would face it with dignity. The train journey lasted 5 days, a blur of changing landscapes, uncomfortable seats, and dining car meals that Eleanor rationed carefully along with her modest savings. She watched as the verdant hills of the east gave way to the sprawling plains and eventually the rugged beauty of Texas. Fellow passengers came and went, few bothering to engage the quiet, heavy-set woman who kept to herself, always with sewing or a book in hand. On the final day, a family boarded at a small station, a mother, father, and 2 young girls who took the seats across from Eleanor. The younger daughter started openly. "Mama," she said loud enough for everyone in the car to hear, "why is that lady so fat?" The mother shushed her hastily, face reddening as she avoided Eleanor's eyes. The father murmured something about manners. It was a familiar scene, one Eleanor had experienced in various forms throughout her life. The tactless comment, the embarrassed response, the subsequent avoidance. She gave the child a small smile, then returned to her book, ignoring the burning in her cheeks. Later, when the family disembarked, the mother pausing to whisper an apology that managed to be both genuine and uncomfortable, Eleanor found herself reflecting on what awaited her in Clearwater. Would her future husband show the same flicker of distaste she had grown accustomed to seeing? Would his neighbors, his friends? She touched the silver rose brooch for reassurance, reminding herself that she was heading toward a life of purpose and companionship, even if love might be too much to hope for. Clearwater, Texas announced itself, with a cluster of buildings rising from the plains like a mirage. As the train slowed, Eleanor gathered her belongings, one trunk to be collected later, one carpet bag containing immediate necessities. Her heart hammered. This moment would determine the course of the rest of her life. The platform was busy with activity. Cowboys loading cattle, merchants receiving supplies, a few families greeting arriving relatives. Eleanor descended carefully from the train, immediately conscious of curious glances. A small town like this would notice any newcomer, particularly one who didn't fit the mold of the slender, weather-hardened women who populated such frontier communities. "You must be Miss Hayes." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. Eleanor turned to find a tall man, watching her with intelligent grey eyes. James Worthington was not what she had expected. His correspondence had suggested someone older, perhaps portly and balding, like the businessmen who ordered custom shirts from her shop in Boston. Instead, he appeared to be exactly the age he had claimed, 38, with broad shoulders, strong features weathered by sun and wind, and dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. He was handsome in a rugged way that made Eleanor intensely Aware of her flushed face and travel-wrinkled clothes, she found herself momentarily speechless, managing only a nod. "I'm James Worthington," he said, removing his hat. "Welcome to Clearwater, Miss Hayes." "Thank you, Mr. Worthington," she finally replied, gathering her composure. "It's a pleasure to meet you at last." He offered a brief smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, then gestured toward her carpet bag. "May I?" When she nodded, he took the bag, then indicated they should walk toward a wagon waiting at the end of the platform. Eleanor followed, acutely, unconscious of the stares following their progress. Whispers rose in their wake. "That's Worthington's mail-order bride." Good Lord, did he know what he was getting? "Poor man'll need a bigger wagon just to get her home." Each comment struck like a physical blow, though Eleanor kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral, a skill perfected through years of similar experiences. James Worthington gave no indication he heard the remarks, but the rigid set of his shoulders suggested otherwise. At the wagon, he stowed her carpet bag and then turned to face her directly. "Miss Hayes, I believe in plain speaking between adults. You've had a long journey, and I imagine you'd appreciate some time to refresh yourself before we discuss our arrangement. I've taken a room for you at the hotel." He nodded toward a 2-story building across the street. "We can meet for dinner at 6, if that suits you." The unexpected suggestion caught Eleanor off guard. "That's very considerate, Mr. Worthington, thank you." He nodded once, then assisted her into the wagon, with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size and obvious strength. The brief journey to the hotel passed in silence, the main street of Clearwater offering a typical scene of frontier commerce, a general store, a bank, a saloon, a small church at the far end. Women stopped their shopping to watch the wagon pass. Men paused in their conversations. News of the mail-order bride's arrival had clearly preceded her. At the hotel, Mr. Worthington spoke briefly with the clerk while Eleanor waited, trying to ignore the frank stares from 2 women seated in the small lobby. He returned with a key, which he handed to her with formal courtesy. "Room 204. Your trunk will be delivered when it's unloaded. I'll call you at 6. With that, he departed, leaving Eleanor to follow a wide-eyed young bellhop up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room overlooking the main street. Alone at last, she sank onto the edge of the bed, emotions she had suppressed throughout the journey finally surfacing. What had she done? Traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a stranger in a town already visibly hostile to her presence? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. James Worthington had been polite, but his reserved manner revealed nothing of his true thoughts upon seeing her. Did he share the evident disappointment of his neighbors? Was he already regretting his offer? Eleanor moved to the washstand, removing her bonnet and unpinning her hair. The face that looked back from the small mirror was flushed, tired, and undeniably round. She had never been slender, not even as a child. Years of sedentary work and modest means had only emphasized her natural tendency toward fullness. In Boston, at least, she had been largely anonymous, just another seamstress among many, forgotten as soon as she delivered her work. Here she was an oddity, a source of entertainment for a small town where diversions were presumably limited. The prospect of facing the dining room alone that evening filled her with dread. Yet the alternative, requesting a tray in her room like an invalid, seemed a surrender she wasn't prepared to make. With determined movements, Eleanor unpacked her brushes and toiletries. She would rest, bathe, and change into her best dress, the royal blue wool that brought out the warmth in her complexion. Whatever judgment awaited her at dinner, she would meet it with dignity. 3 hours later, refreshed and attired in her finest, Eleanor sat at the small vanity, securing the last pins in her carefully arranged hair. The silver rose brooch gleamed, at her collar, providing a small measure of confidence. As she studied her reflection, a knock sounded at her door. James Worthington had also changed for dinner, his work clothes replaced by a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. His eyes widened briefly as she opened the door, a reaction so subtle Eleanor might have missed it had she not been watching closely. "Miss Hayes," he said, offering his arm. "You look lovely." The compliment, delivered in the same direct manner as his previous statements, caught her by surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Worthington." The hotel dining room fell silent as they entered, every head turning to observe them. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the table to which they were led, pretending not to notice the nudges, whispers, and frankly incredulous stares. James Worthington's expression remained impassive as he held her chair, then took his own seat across from her. A waiter approached with visible reluctance, placing menus before them. "Evening, Mr. Worthington, ma'am." "Thomas," James acknowledged, with a nod. "Please bring a bottle of your better claret." When the waiter retreated, an awkward silence descended. Eleanor studied her menu with unnecessary intensity, using it as a shield against the continued scrutiny from nearby tables. "The beefsteak is reliable," James offered, "though I'd avoid the fish this far from any significant body of water." The practical advice, delivered with the faintest hint of dry humor, eased some of the tension in Eleanor's shoulders. "Thank you for the warning." After they ordered, beefsteak for him, chicken for her, James folded his hands on the table and regarded her directly. "I imagine you have questions, Miss Hayes." "Several," she admitted, "though perhaps the most pressing is whether you're having second thoughts about our arrangement." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Direct indeed. May I ask why you would think so?" Eleanor glanced pointedly around the dining room, where patrons were making minimal effort to disguise their eavesdropping. "It seems I'm not what Clearwater expected in a bride for James Worthington." He took a sip of water. "And you believe I share the town's apparent disappointment?" "It would be understandable if you did." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I did not misrepresent myself in my letters, Mr. Worthington, but neither did I volunteer certain details about my appearance." The waiter returned with wine, pouring 2 glasses with deliberate slowness before retreating again. James lifted his glass in a small toast. "To honesty between potential partners," he said, then took a measured sip. "Miss Hayes, I did not request a photograph because I have found, in my experience, that appearance is the least reliable indicator of character. I sought a wife with intelligence, practical skills, and the courage to build a life in a challenging environment. Your letters suggested you possess these qualities. Nothing I have observed today contradicts that assessment." The simple statement, delivered without flourish or excessive sentiment, affected Eleanor more deeply than flowery praise might have. She took a sip of wine to compose herself before responding. "You're very kind, Mr. Worthington." "Not particularly," he replied. "Just practical. Clearwater is 20 miles from my ranch. These people," he made a subtle gesture encompassing the dining room, "are neighbors in the loosest sense of the word. Their opinions matter far less than whether you and I can form a mutually beneficial partnership." Eleanor studied him over, the rim of her glass. "And do you believe we can?" "I believe it's worth discovering," he said, "if you're still willing." Their meals arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. Eleanor was conscious of her table manners, eating small, careful bites despite genuine hunger from her journey. James Worthington ate with the efficiency of a man accustomed to seeing food as necessary fuel rather than a pleasure, though he showed no signs of rushing. "Tell me about your ranch," Eleanor prompted when they had made some progress with their meals. The question transformed him subtly, his posture relaxing, his eyes warming with evident pride. 5,000 acres along the Brazos River. Good water, better grazing land. I run 2,000 head of cattle and keep about 30 horses. The house is substantial, 6 bedrooms, though I only use one. My foreman and his wife live in a smaller house nearby. There are bunkhouses for the cowboys, a cookhouse, the usual outbuildings. It sounds impressive, Eleanor said, genuinely intrigued. Have you lived there long? 12 years. Bought the first 1,000 acres when land was cheap, and most people thought ranching so far from railways was foolhardy. A hint of satisfaction colored his tone. They've since revised their opinions. And before that, he cut another piece of steak before answering. I came to Texas after the war, the Confederate one, though I fought for the Union, worked as a trail boss, saved every penny, learned everything I could about cattle and land. When the opportunity came to buy my own spread, I took it. You've accomplished a great deal, Eleanor observed. As have you, in your way, he replied unexpectedly. Support yourself independently all these years in a competitive trade. That requires its own kind of courage. The acknowledgement of her work as something valuable rather than merely necessary struck Eleanor deeply. So few people, especially men, recognize the determination required to survive as a woman alone. As they finished their meal, the dining room gradually emptied, the entertainment of observing the mismatched pair apparently insufficient to delay other evening activities. When only a few tables remained occupied, James leaned forward slightly. Miss Hayes, I promised in my letter that if upon meeting me you wished to return to Boston, I would arrange it without question. I now extend the same assurance having met you. If Clearwater's reception has given you doubts, or if you find me unsuitable for any reason, please know the choice remains entirely yours. The offer, repeated after he had seen her, carried significant weight. Eleanor considered it carefully, weighing the discomfort of the town's judgment against the prospect of returning to her solitary existence in Boston. Mr. Worthington, she said finally, I traveled here seeking a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Nothing in our interaction today has discouraged that hope. She met his gaze directly. If your offer of marriage still stands, I'm inclined to accept it. Something that might have been relief flickered across his features. It stands, Miss Hayes, though I suggest a proper courtship of at least a few weeks before we formalize our arrangement. The town gossip are problematic enough without adding a scandalously hasty wedding to their ammunition. Eleanor smiled for the first time since arriving in Clearwater. A sensible precaution, Mr. Worthington. James, he corrected, returning, her smile with a small one of his own. If we're to be courting, we should at least use our given names. Eleanor, she offered in return. He signaled for the bill, then regarded her with those steady grey eyes. Well, Eleanor Hayes, welcome to Texas. I suspect neither Clearwater nor its residents know quite what to make of you yet. His expression softened slightly. That makes 2 of us, but I look forward to finding out. As they left the dining room together, Eleanor was conscious of the remaining diners watching their departure, of the brooch gleaming at her collar, of the tall figure beside her who had shown more consideration in a few hours than most had offered her in years. Tomorrow would bring new judgments, new challenges. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor walked with her head high, fear giving way to cautious hope for the future unfolding before her. Eleanor awakened to unfamiliar sounds. Distant cattle lowing, a rooster's persistent crow, the clatter of wagons already moving along Clearwater's main street. The hotel room's thin curtains did little to block the morning sunlight streaming through the east-facing window. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Then memory returned. The train journey, the stairs, dinner with James Worthington. She rose, washing at the basin before donning a practical grey day dress. Today would bring decisions that couldn't be delayed, if she truly intended to accept James Worthington's proposal. Arrangements would need to be made. If not, she faced the long journey back to Boston, to the life she had so eagerly abandoned. A soft knock at her door revealed a maid bearing a tray with coffee, toast, and a folded note. Eleanor thanked the young woman, who stared openly at her. Before bobbing a hasty curtsy and retreating, the note bore James Worthington's bold handwriting. Eleanor, business requires my attention in town today. If convenient, I would be pleased to show you Clearwater this afternoon. I'll call you at 1 o'clock. Yours respectfully, James. The simple courtesy of providing breakfast and the respectful tone of the note reinforced Eleanor's initial impression of James as a considerate man. She settled at the small table by the window, sipping coffee while watching the town come to life below. Clearwater was larger than it had appeared from the train. Perhaps 500 residents, she estimated. The main street featured the essential businesses of any frontier town, while side streets revealed modest homes, a schoolhouse, and what appeared to be a dressmaker's shop that immediately piqued Eleanor's professional interest. Her observations were interrupted by the arrival of her trunk. Once alone again, she unpacked her possessions, arranging them neatly in the room's small dresser and wardrobe. The familiar ritual helped calm her lingering anxiety about the day ahead. At precisely 1 o'clock, James Worthington knocked at her door. He wore a dark blue shirt, practical trousers, and a vest that, while not formal, suggested he had given thought to his appearance. "I hope you rested well," he said as they descended the hotel stairs. "Yes, thank you. And thank you for the breakfast." He nodded in acknowledgement. "I thought you might prefer privacy this morning, given the reception at dinner last night." The simple awareness of how uncomfortable the dining room experience had been, and his effort to spare her a repetition, touched Eleanor deeply. It suggested an empathy she had rarely encountered, particularly from men. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, the busy street momentarily paused. Shopkeepers and customers alike turned to observe them, conversation dying away only to resume with increased urgency once they had passed. Eleanor kept her gaze forward, chin lifted slightly, though her cheeks warmed with the familiar burn of unwanted attention. James seemed unaffected by the scrutiny, maintaining a polite distance while guiding her through town. He indicated buildings of interest: the bank where he conducted business, the general store that stocked surprisingly good tea from San Francisco, the post office where her letters had arrived. "And this," he said, pausing before a modest structure, with a hand-painted sign reading "Harper's Dressmaking and Alterations, I thought might interest you professionally." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "You remembered my occupation." "Of course." He seemed genuinely puzzled that she would think otherwise. "Your skills were a significant factor in my decision to invite you to Clearwater." Before Eleanor could respond, the shop door opened, revealing a thin woman of perhaps 45, her sharp features arranged in an expression of barely concealed curiosity. "Mr. Worthington," she greeted, eyes moving quickly to Eleanor. "What a pleasant surprise." "Mrs. Harper," James nodded. "Allow me to introduce Miss Eleanor Hayes, recently arrived from Boston. Miss Hayes is an accomplished seamstress." "Is she?" "Indeed." Mrs. Harper's assessment became more calculating. "Boston training, you say?" 12 years' experience, Eleanor confirmed, including work with Madame Laurent on Tremont Street. The name clearly registered with Mrs. Harper, whose eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, that's impressive. Perhaps you'd like to see my humble establishment." The invitation, while not particularly warm, offered Eleanor her first opportunity to connect with someone in Clearwater besides James. She glanced at him for permission. "By all means," he said. "I have a brief matter to discuss with the blacksmith. Shall we say half an hour?" With that arrangement made, Eleanor followed Mrs. Harper into the shop. The interior was neat, but modestly equipped. 2 sewing machines, a cutting table, dress forms of various sizes, though none approaching Eleanor's proportions, and shelves of fabric that, while limited in selection, appeared to be of decent quality. "So," Mrs. Harper began, once pleasantries had been exchanged, "you're Mr. Worthington's correspondence bride." The slight hesitation spoke volumes. Eleanor maintained her composure, having anticipated this line of questioning. "Mr. Worthington and I are becoming acquainted, yes." Mrs. Harper fingered a bolt of calico. "Well, you should know that half the unmarried women in Clearwater have set their caps for James Worthington over the years, including Olivia Sutton, whose father owns the bank. She won't take kindly to being passed over for someone from Boston." The implied criticism hung in the air. Eleanor chose to address it directly. "Mrs. Harper, I imagine my arrival has provided considerable entertainment for Clearwater. I'm aware that I don't conform to the usual expectations for a bride, mail order or otherwise, but I would prefer honest discourse to veiled insults." Mrs. Harper's eyes widened at this directness, then narrowed with reassessment. After a moment, a reluctant smile touched her lips. "Well, perhaps there's more to you than meets the eye, Miss Hayes." She gestured toward the back room. "Would you care for tea, since we're being honest with one another?" The following 20 minutes proved surprisingly pleasant. Mrs. Harper, Martha, as she invited Eleanor to call her, revealed herself to be a shrewd businesswoman with a genuine talent for tailoring. She had moved to Clearwater after being widowed in Dallas, establishing her shop 5 years earlier. While not overtly friendly, she displayed a professional respect for Eleanor's experience that felt like the first step toward potential acceptance. "Clearwater's growing," Martha remarked as they finished their tea. "The wives of ranch managers and merchants want fashionable clothing, but most can't afford to send them away to Dallas or San Antonio. A skilled seamstress with Boston experience could do well here." "Are you offering me a position, Mrs. Harper?" Eleanor asked with mild amusement. "Let's call it keeping options open," Martha replied, "should your arrangement with Mr. Worthington not proceed as planned." The reminder of her uncertain status sobered Eleanor. "I appreciate your candor." When James returned, Martha's manner became briskly professional again, though she bid Eleanor goodbye with slightly more warmth than her initial greeting had suggested. "A productive conversation?" James asked, as they continued their tour. "Surprisingly so." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "She mentioned someone named Olivia Sutton, the banker's daughter." James's expression didn't change, but his stride slowed fractionally. "Ah, I see the town gossip are working efficiently, as usual. Is there something I should know?" He sighed, guiding her toward a small park at the end of the main street where a few benches offered relative privacy. Once seated, he turned to face her directly. "Miss Sutton, Olivia, has made it known that she would welcome my attentions. Her father has similarly indicated that he would look favorably upon a match between us." His tone remained neutral, revealing little of his personal feelings on the matter. "I see." Eleanor smoothed her skirt, processing this information. "She's considered a beauty, I presume." "By local standards, yes. She's also 22 years old, educated at a finishing school in St. Louis, and the potential heiress to the largest financial institution in the county." He stated these facts without inflection. "She sounds like an excellent prospect for marriage," Eleanor observed, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Why did you send for me instead?" James considered her question with the same thoughtfulness he seemed to apply to all matters. "Miss Sutton represents a particular vision of marriage, one based on social alignment, financial advantage, and continuation of established patterns. That vision has its merits. But it's not what you want," Eleanor guessed. "No." His grey eyes held hers. I've built my ranch from nothing, against considerable doubt and some active opposition. I have no family name to uphold, no social position to maintain. What I seek is a partner who understands the value of creating something through effort and perseverance, someone who sees worth beyond surface appearances. The implication hung between them, that he recognized this quality in her, that perhaps her struggles as a woman, judged primarily for her appearance, had created a perspective. He valued Mr. Worthington James, Eleanor said carefully. I appreciate your candor, but I must ask, are you certain you wish to pursue this arrangement? Clearwater seems united in its opinion that you could make more conventional choice. I've rarely made conventional choices, Miss Hayes. That's why I own the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties, while men who followed safer paths work for wages. He offered a small smile. Besides, I find Clearwater's united opinions are often in need of education. Before Eleanor could respond, a high, feminine voice called out from across the street. James Worthington! What a delightful surprise! A young woman approached, her yellow day dress expertly tailored to flatter a slender figure, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have required considerable time and assistance. She was, by any standard, beautiful, delicate features, clear complexion, large blue eyes now fixed on James with obvious pleasure. Miss Sutton, James acknowledged, standing politely. Good afternoon. I've just come from Papa's bank. He mentioned you were in town on business. Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, a flicker of disdain quickly masked by practiced social grace. Won't you introduce me to your companion? James performed the introduction with perfect courtesy. Miss Olivia Sutton. May I present Miss Eleanor Hayes of Boston? Miss Hayes, Miss Sutton is the daughter of Clearwater's foremost banker, as you may have gathered. Eleanor inclined her head. Miss Sutton, a pleasure. Olivia's smile remained fixed as her eyes conducted a swift, dismissive assessment of Eleanor's figure, her practical grey dress, her simple hairstyle. Boston, how fascinating. Are you visiting family in Clearwater, Miss Hayes? The deliberate misunderstanding, pretending not to know exactly who Eleanor was and why she had come, represented a familiar female tactic. Eleanor had observed similar maneuvers in Boston's social circles, usually deployed by wealthy clients toward those they considered beneath notice. Miss Hayes is my guest, James interjected before Eleanor could respond. She arrived yesterday. At my invitation. Olivia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Indeed, how unexpected. She turned her attention fully to James, effectively dismissing Eleanor from the conversation. James, you simply must join us for dinner this Sunday. Papa was just saying how long it's been since you visited properly. We're having several distinguished guests from Austin. James remained polite but firm. Thank you for the invitation, Miss Sutton, but I have prior commitments. Surely nothing that can't be rescheduled, Olivia pressed, resting delicate fingers briefly on his arm. Papa is eager to discuss that western grazing land you've been considering. Eleanor watched the exchange with growing understanding. Olivia Sutton represented exactly what Martha Harper had implied, a beautiful, socially connected young woman who had set her ambitions on James Worthington and was accustomed to getting what she wanted. Her practiced charm, her strategic mention of business opportunities through her father, her casual touch, all were weapons in a feminine arsenal Eleanor had never possessed. Please convey my regrets to your father, James said, unmoved by these tactics. My schedule is quite fixed for the coming weeks. Olivia's pleasant expression faltered momentarily before she recovered. Another time, then. She offered Eleanor a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Miss Hayes, how lovely to meet you. I do hope you enjoy your brief stay in our little town. The emphasis on brief was subtle but unmistakable. With a final warm look at James, Olivia continued down the street, her yellow skirt swaying gracefully. "Well," Eleanor said after a moment, "I believe I've just been issued a warning." James sighed. "Miss Sutton can be determined." "She's beautiful," Eleanor observed neutrally, "and clearly accustomed to getting her way." "Beauty and determination are common enough qualities," he replied. "Genuine character is rarer." The simple statement, delivered without flattery or excessive sentiment, affected Eleanor deeply. Throughout her life, she had been defined primarily by what she lacked: conventional beauty, slenderness, the kind of feminine appeal that opened doors and softened men's expressions. To have her character valued above these absent qualities by a man who could clearly claim the attentions of someone like Olivia Sutton was disorienting. Their tour continued, the encounter with Olivia adding a new layer of complexity to Eleanor's assessment of Clearwater and her potential future there. It became increasingly evident that by accepting James Worthington's proposal, she would be stepping into an established social dynamic where she was already cast as an interloper, an oddity, a woman who had somehow secured the attention of the town's most eligible bachelor despite her obvious shortcomings. Yet James himself seemed entirely untroubled by these undercurrents. He introduced Eleanor to the merchants they encountered with straightforward courtesy, neither apologizing for her presence nor overcompensating with excessive attention. When they stopped at the general store to purchase small necessities for her hotel stay, he handled the shopkeeper's poorly concealed curiosity with calm dignity that discouraged further questions. As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor found herself studying James with increasing curiosity. He was not a demonstrative man, no flowery compliments, no unnecessary touches, no grand gestures. Yet in 100 small ways he showed consideration, adjusting his long stride to accommodate her more measured pace, positioning himself between her and the more openly curious onlookers, selecting a restaurant for their late lunch that offered a private corner table away from prying eyes. "You've been very kind today," Eleanor said as they finished their meal. "I appreciate your patience. With Clearwater's interest in your affairs," James set down his coffee cup. "Small towns run on gossip, I'm afraid. It will subside eventually once they find a new topic of fascination." "And if I decide to stay? To accept your proposal?" Eleanor asked. "Will the gossip subside then, or merely change its nature?" He considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "There will be talk, certainly. Questions about my judgment, theories about my motives, speculation about our arrangement. Some will be merely curious, others actively malicious." His direct gaze met hers. "Does that concern you?" Eleanor thought of her life in Boston. The whispers that followed her into fitting rooms, the knowing looks when she purchased fabric for her own dresses, the careful distance maintained by those who feared her size might somehow be contagious. She had never been free from judgment. The question was merely its source and intensity. "I'm accustomed to being an object of curiosity," she said finally. "What concerns me more is whether such attention would damage your standing in the community, your business interests." James looked genuinely surprised by this consideration. "My standing rests on the quality of my cattle and the reliability of my word, Miss Hayes. Neither of those factors is influenced by whom I choose to marry." As they left the restaurant, the afternoon sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across Clearwater's main street. They walked slowly back toward the hotel, the day's experiences settling between them with the weight of significant decisions ahead. At the hotel entrance, James turned to face her. "Tomorrow I must return to the ranch to attend to pending matters. I would be honored if you would accompany me to see where you might live should our arrangement proceed." The invitation represented a crucial step, moving from theoretical discussions to practical assessment of what marriage to James Worthington would entail. Eleanor felt the weight of the moment, the sense of standing at a crossroads with her old life behind her and an unknown future ahead. "I would like that very much," she said. "Excellent. I'll arrange for suitable transportation." He hesitated, then added, "The journey takes approximately 2 hours. We'll depart at 9, if that's convenient." "Perfectly convenient, thank you." He took her hand briefly in formal farewell, the contact warm and steady. "Until tomorrow, then." Eleanor watched him walk away, his tall figure moving with the same quiet confidence he had displayed throughout their interactions. Only when he had disappeared around a corner did she enter the hotel, climbing the stairs to her room, with thoughts tumbling through her mind like leaves in a strong wind. The day had brought revelations that required careful consideration. The territorial, beautiful daughter of a powerful banker, the curious but not entirely unwelcoming seamstress, the undercurrent of judgment from the townspeople balanced against James Worthington's steadfast courtesy. Most significantly, the growing realization that James had chosen her, actively, deliberately chosen her over more conventional options for reasons she was only beginning to understand. In her room, Eleanor sat at the small writing desk and began a letter to her former employer in Boston, explaining that she would not be returning to claim her position. The act itself represented a commitment, a step across a threshold from which retreat would become increasingly difficult. As she sealed the envelope, Eleanor caught her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. The face that looked back at her was the same one she had known all her life. Round cheeks, determined chin, eyes that had seen too much disappointment to be truly naive. Yet something had changed. Some subtle shift in her expression, perhaps, or in the way she carried herself after a day spent at James Worthington's side. Tomorrow she would see the ranch, the place that might become her home. Tomorrow she would learn more about the man who had sent for a bride and received far more than the conventional frontier beauty he might have expected. Tomorrow, perhaps, she would begin to understand why he seemed so untroubled by the very qualities that had defined and limited her life in Boston. Eleanor prepared for sleep with methodical care, laying out her most practical dress for the journey to the ranch. Whatever awaited her there, whether promise or disappointment, she would face it with the same dignity she had maintained throughout her life. The only difference was that now, for perhaps the first time, she did not face it entirely alone. Outside her window, Clearwater settled into evening rhythms, lamps being lit, saloon music drifting faintly on the breeze, the distant lowing of cattle being settled for the night. The sounds of a place that was still foreign to Eleanor, still filled with uncertain welcome and potential rejection. Yet, as she drifted toward sleep, it was not these concerns that occupied her thoughts, but the memory of James Worthington's steady gaze, as he had said so simply, "Genuine character is rarer." In those 4 words lay a recognition of worth that no one in Boston had ever offered her. That alone made the journey worthwhile, whatever tomorrow might bring. The carriage James Worthington provided for their journey to the ranch surprised Eleanor with its comfort. Rather than the utilitarian wagon she had expected, a well-sprung buggy awaited her outside the hotel, its leather seats gleaming with care, a small foot-warmer positioned thoughtfully for her use. James himself handled the reins, guiding a matched pair of bay horses through Clearwater streets and then onto the wide dirt road that led westward. "The ranch lies between the Brazos and Colorado rivers," James explained, as buildings gave way to open landscape. "When I purchased the initial property, most considered it too remote for successful ranching. The nearest railway was 50 miles away." "What convinced you otherwise?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about his vision. "Water rights," he replied. "Land without reliable water is worthless in Texas, regardless of size. My property has natural springs, good drainage, and access to river water even in drought years. A hint of pride colored his typically measured tone. "I paid extra for those water rights. People thought I was foolish at the time. But you proved them wrong." James nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "The second year, when surrounding ranches lost cattle to drought, mine thrived. By the third year, those who had questioned my judgment were offering to buy sections of my property at triple what I'd paid." "You didn't sell," Eleanor observed. "Not an acre." The simple statement carried the weight of a philosophy. Hold firm to your convictions, even when others doubt. The landscape unfolded around them in undulating waves of prairie, punctuated by stands of oak and mesquite. April had painted the hills with wildflowers, bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, primrose, creating splashes of color against new grass. The beauty surprised Eleanor, who had imagined Texas as uniformly brown and dusty. "It's breathtaking," she admitted, gesturing toward a hillside covered in blue and orange blooms. "Spring comes dramatically here," James agreed. "The contrast with winter is part of what makes it special. Beauty earned through endurance means more than beauty that's never been tested." The observation settled between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate context. Eleanor glanced at her companion, wondering if he had intended the parallel. To human experience, his profile revealed nothing, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. As they traveled, James pointed out landmarks and boundaries. The creek that marked the eastern edge of his property, distant hills where he ran younger cattle, a stand of oak trees near which wild turkeys nested. His knowledge of the land was intimate, detailed, the accumulation of years spent observing and understanding the terrain that supported his livelihood. "How large is your household staff?" Eleanor asked as they crested a rise that revealed more of the sprawling property. "Staff?" James seemed momentarily confused by the question. "Mrs. Peterson, my foreman's wife, comes in 3 times weekly to clean and do laundry. She'll prepare special meals when I entertain business associates, which isn't often. Otherwise, I manage for myself." The answer surprised Eleanor, who had assumed a property of this size would maintain a full complement of servants. "You cook your own meals?" A flash of humor brightened his eyes. "Nothing elaborate, I assure you, but yes, I'm capable of preparing basic food without poisoning myself." He glanced at her. "Would that arrangement be unsatisfactory?" "If you prefer additional household help, that could be arranged." "No, not at all," Eleanor assured him quickly. "I simply expected. Well, a man of your means usually employs a larger staff." "A man of my means in Boston or New York might," James acknowledged. "Out here, practical self-sufficiency is valued above displays of wealth. Most of my neighbors would find a house full of servants more off-putting than impressive." The clarification offered Eleanor a glimpse into the social values of her potential new home, where competence and self-reliance apparently carried more weight than the trappings of status she had observed among wealthy Bostonians. It was a perspective she found unexpectedly appealing. They turned into a well-maintained private road, passing under a wrought-iron arch bearing the brand James had mentioned in his letters, a stylized W with a star above it. Half a mile beyond stood a cluster of buildings nestled against the backdrop of a modest hill. The main house surprised Eleanor with its blend of practicality and grace. A 2-story structure built from local limestone with a broad porch wrapping around 3 sides and large windows positioned to capture light throughout the day. It wasn't ostentatious, but neither was it the crude cabin many frontier women found themselves managing. "It's lovely," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "Thank you. I designed it myself, though professional builders handled the actual construction." James brought the buggy to a halt before the front steps. "The central portion was completed 9 years ago. The east and west wings were added as the ranch prospered." He assisted Eleanor from the carriage with gentlemanly courtesy, then led her up the steps to a wide front door of carved oak. The interior revealed the same thoughtful planning as the exterior. Spacious rooms with high ceilings to mitigate summer heat, fireplaces strategically placed for winter warmth, furniture that balanced comfort with practicality. The house has 6 bedrooms, James explained as they moved through the ground floor. My quarters are in the west wing. The east wing contains guest rooms and my office. He hesitated briefly. Should our arrangement proceed, you would have your choice of rooms naturally, or we could discuss modifications to suit your preferences. The careful neutrality with which he referenced their potential marriage struck Eleanor as both considerate and slightly distant. James Worthington continued to present himself as a man offering a practical partnership rather than romantic passion. Exactly, as his letters had suggested, without pretense or false promises. The tour continued through a functional kitchen equipped with a modern stove, a formal dining room capable of seating 12, and a library whose well-stocked shelves revealed eclectic tastes ranging from practical animal husbandry to classical literature. You enjoy reading, Eleanor observed, noting the careful organization of the volumes. A necessary habit when one lives 20 miles from the nearest town, James replied, though I'd likely indulge regardless of location. Books have been my most consistent companions since childhood. The personal admission, one of the few he had offered, piqued Eleanor's curiosity. Were you raised in Texas? No. James ran a finger along the spine of a leather-bound volume. I grew up in Illinois. My father was a schoolteacher with scholarly ambitions but modest means. He valued education above all else. A shadow crossed his features. He died when I was 16. I left school to support my mother and younger sister. I'm sorry, Eleanor said softly. That must have been difficult. It was educational, he replied, the wry tone softening what might have seemed a callous response. I learned early that security must be built, not merely wished for. He gestured toward the window where the ranch spread beyond. Every acre out there represents that lesson. The glimpse into James's formative experiences offered context for his practical nature, his evident self-reliance, his emphasis on substantive character over social conformity. His success had been hard-won rather than inherited, a path not entirely unlike Eleanor's own, though in a different arena. They continued to the upper floor, where James indicated bedrooms of varying sizes, each simply but comfortably furnished. He seemed carefully respectful of Eleanor's privacy, opening doors for her inspection, but never crossing thresholds himself, maintaining a propriety that spoke well of his intentions. The final room on their tour was a surprise, a spacious chamber in the east wing, bathed in northern light from tall windows, containing a large cutting table, a high-quality sewing machine, and various dressmaking supplies. This was intended as another guest room, James explained, watching Eleanor's reaction. But it occurred to me that you might appreciate a dedicated workspace. The light is excellent until late afternoon. The thoughtful preparation, clearly done in anticipation of her possible acceptance of his proposal, touched Eleanor deeply. Few men of her acquaintance would have considered her professional skills worth accommodating, let alone created a space specifically designed for them. This is remarkably considerate, she said, running a hand over the smooth surface of the cutting table. Practical, James corrected, though the slight warming of his expression suggested her appreciation pleased him. Your letters spoke of sewing as both livelihood and passion. It seemed reasonable that you would wish to continue. You didn't expect me to abandon my skills upon marriage? Many men would have, viewing a wife's previous occupation as unnecessary or even inappropriate once she was under their protection. That would seem wasteful, James replied simply. Clearwater has limited options for quality dressmaking. Harper manages basic needs, but nothing more elaborate. Your Boston training could be quite valuable locally. Once again, Eleanor found herself reassessing her understanding of this unusual man. He viewed her professional abilities as an asset, rather than an inconvenience, something to be utilized rather than discarded. It was a perspective she had rarely encountered among men of any social standing. Their tour complete, James suggested refreshments on the covered rear porch, which offered a view of the ranch operations beyond. Barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and in the distance, grazing cattle. A Hispanic woman, approximately Eleanor's age, had prepared coffee and a light meal, which she served with quiet efficiency before withdrawing. "Maria Peterson," James explained. "My foreman's wife. She's been with the ranch 5 years. Eleanor observed the women's retreat, noting the respectful but not subservient manner with which she had interacted with James. "She seems very capable." "Extraordinarily so. Her husband, Lucas, manages the daily operations of the ranch. 30 cowboys, 5,000 cattle, and all the complications both entail." He poured coffee for Eleanor, then himself. "They live in the stone house visible just beyond the main barn. They're expecting their 3rd child in June." As they ate, James outlined the rhythm of ranch life, the seasonal cycles of calving, branding, and driving mature cattle to market, the constant work of maintaining fences, managing water resources, and monitoring the health of the herd, the social aspects of neighboring ranches, gathering for occasional communal work efforts or celebrations. It painted a picture of a life both demanding and rewarding, one requiring fortitude and practical skill rather than social graces or conventional beauty. A life in which Eleanor's particular strengths might be valued rather than overlooked. "You've built something remarkable here," she said when he had finished. "It's still building," he corrected. "A ranch is never complete, merely at different stages of development." He studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "The question is whether you see yourself as part of that development." The directness of the question was characteristic of the man Eleanor was learning. James Worthington did not engage in social evasions or polite fictions. He spoke his mind clearly and expected others to do the same. "I'm beginning to," she answered, with equal honesty, "though I still have questions about what my role would entail beyond the obvious domestic aspects." James nodded, seemingly pleased by her practical approach. "Ranch wives typically manage household accounts, garden production, preservation of food for winter, and often social connections with neighboring properties. Some maintain correspondence with cattle buyers or supply merchants. A few actively participate in ranch operations, riding with their husbands, assisting with carving, occasionally even joining roundups." "And which would you prefer?" Eleanor asked directly. "I would prefer a partner who finds fulfillment in her contributions, whatever form they take," he replied without hesitation. "Your skills and interests should determine your role, not arbitrary expectations." The response confirmed Eleanor's growing impression of James as a man whose views on marriage differed significantly from conventional wisdom. He seemed to envision a genuine partnership, rather than the more common arrangement where wives served primarily as extensions of their husband's status and ambitions. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, weathered man in practical ranch attire. He approached with the easy confidence of someone secure in his position. "Mr. Worthington," he nodded. "Sorry to intrude. Johnson's back from checking the north pasture. Says the Coopers have cattle on our side of the fence line again." James's expression tightened slightly. "How many? 20, maybe 25 head. Second time this month." "Deliberate then," James concluded. "I'll ride out after lunch to see for myself." He turned to Eleanor. "Miss Hayes, may I introduce Lucas Peterson, my foreman. Lucas, Miss Eleanor Hayes of Boston." Peterson tipped his, and respectfully, "Ma'am, welcome to Worthington Ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," Eleanor replied. "Your wife prepared a lovely meal. She'll be pleased to hear it." Maria was hoping to meet you properly, but didn't want to intrude on your tour. His direct gaze held none of the assessment or judgment Eleanor had encountered in town, merely professional courtesy. James addressed him again. "Tell Johnson to prepare 3 horses. You and I will ride to the north boundary. Miss Hayes will return to town with me afterward." With a nod, Peterson departed, moving with the efficient stride of a man with many responsibilities. "I apologize for the interruption," James said once they were alone again. "Ranch business often requires immediate attention." "No apology needed," Eleanor assured him. "I appreciate seeing the actual workings of the place, not just its appealing aspects." James studied her for a moment. Most women would find boundary disputes and cattle trespassing tedious at best, concerning at worst. "Most women haven't spent their lives working for practical survival," Eleanor replied. "I find honest challenges preferable to polite fictions." Something shifted in James's expression, a subtle relaxation of his habitual reserve. "As do I, Miss Hayes, as do I." The remainder of their meal passed in comfortable conversation about the ranch's seasonal operations and the adjustments Eleanor might expect coming from a city environment. James neither sugar-coated the difficulties nor exaggerated them, presenting frontier life with the same straightforward assessment he seemed to apply to all matters. When it came time to depart, he excused himself briefly to change into riding clothes, returning in practical attire that emphasized his height and the lean strength developed through years of physical work. Eleanor found herself noticing these aspects of his appearance more distinctly than she had before, an awareness that brought a slight warmth to her cheeks. The return journey to Clearwater was surprisingly comfortable despite the morning's revelations. James spoke of his plans for expanding the ranch's operations, his experiments with breeding sturdier cattle, his occasional journeys to Kansas City or Chicago on business. Eleanor shared stories of her work in Boston, the varied clients she had served, the satisfaction of creating garments that transformed how women presented themselves to the world. As they approached the outskirts of town, James slowed the buggy, his expression growing more serious. "I'll be occupied with this boundary matter for several days," he said. "The Coopers have been testing limits since they arrived from East Texas last year. This latest incursion requires a clear response." "I understand," Eleanor replied, though she felt a surprising disappointment at the prospect of not seeing him for some time. "I've arranged for you to remain at the hotel naturally. All expenses covered." He hesitated briefly. "I hope you'll use the time to explore Clearwater further, perhaps become better acquainted with Martha Harper or others whose company you might find agreeable." "You're encouraging me to form my own impressions of the town," Eleanor observed. "Yes." James met her gaze directly. "A marriage, even one begun through correspondence, should be entered with clear eyes. Clearwater would be your home as well as mine. Its suitability for you matters." The consideration behind this perspective, that her comfort and satisfaction were factors in his planning, reinforced Eleanor's growing regard for James Worthington. He continued to demonstrate a respect for her autonomy that few men of her acquaintance would have considered necessary or desirable. When they reached the hotel, James assisted her from the buggy with the same courteous attention he had shown. Throughout their acquaintance, standing beside her on the boardwalk, he seemed momentarily hesitant, as if weighing his next words. "I've enjoyed your company today, Miss Hayes," he said finally. "Your perspectives are refreshing." "As are yours, Mr. Worthington," she replied with genuine warmth. "Thank you for showing me your home." "Our home," he corrected gently. "If you choose to make it so." The simple statement hung between them, weighted with possibility. Then, with a brief touch of his hat brim, James returned to the buggy and departed, leaving Eleanor to contemplate the implications of those 3 small words. If you choose. The choice was hers. The realization settled into Eleanor's understanding, with crystalline clarity as she climbed the stairs to her hotel room. Despite the conventions of mail-order arrangements, despite his position and wealth compared to her limited options, James Worthington was leaving the final decision entirely in her hands. Alone in her room, Eleanor unpacked the mental impressions of the day as carefully as she might sort threads for an intricate embroidery. The ranch itself had exceeded her expectations. Well-designed, comfortably appointed, clearly prosperous, without being ostentatious. The glimpses of daily operations suggested a busy but purposeful life, one in which practical skills were valued. Above social polish, most significantly, James himself continued to reveal layers of character that intrigued her. His evident respect for her professional abilities, his thoughtful preparation of a workspace she might use, his encouragement to form independent connections in town, all suggested a man who viewed marriage as a genuine partnership rather than a hierarchical arrangement. Yet questions remained. Practical ones about how she would adapt to the isolation of ranch life after years in a bustling city. Social ones about whether Clearwater would ever truly accept her, particularly with Olivia Sutton's evident opposition. And personal ones about whether the mutual respect she and James were developing might eventually deepen into something warmer. These questions deserved consideration, Eleanor decided, as she changed from her traveling clothes into a simpler dress. And the best way to address them was to accept James's implicit challenge, to explore Clearwater independently, to seek connections beyond him, to determine whether this frontier community could become her home, regardless of initial reactions to her appearance. With newfound determination, Eleanor pinned the silver rose brooch to her collar and descended to the hotel dining room for dinner. The stares and whispers that greeted her were no less noticeable than before, but somehow they seemed to carry less weight. She had stood on the porch of the largest ranch in 3 counties today, conversing as an equal with its owner. She had been offered a choice few women in her position ever received. Whatever Clearwater thought of Eleanor Hayes, the mail-order bride with the fuller figure and practical skills, she was beginning to develop a new understanding of herself. Not merely as a woman seeking security through marriage, but as a potential partner valued for qualities she had never been taught to consider assets. The revelation was both unsettling and exhilarating, like the vast Texas landscape itself, challenging, unfamiliar, but filled with unexpected beauty for those willing to look beyond surface impressions. As Eleanor ate her solitary meal, feeling the curious gazes of Clearwater's residents, but no longer defined by them, she found herself anticipating James's return, with a warmth that had little to do with practical arrangements and much to do with the person he was revealing himself to be, direct but considerate, successful but unpretentious, and most surprisingly of all, a man who seemed to see in Eleanor Hayes qualities worthy of genuine respect. The following morning, Eleanor emerged from the hotel with purposeful steps. If she was to be James Worthington's wife, she needed to understand Clearwater beyond superficial impressions. If the town was to be her home, she must forge connections independent of her relationship with its most prominent citizen. She had dressed with particular care, a deep, plum skirt and jacket that flattered her coloring, her hair arranged simply but neatly, the silver rose brooch pinned at her collar. Her appearance wouldn't silence the whispers, but neither would she apologize for it through slovenly dress or demeanor. Eleanor's first destination was Martha Harper's dressmaking shop. The seamstress greeted her with restrained cordiality, clearly curious about her return, but too professional to pry directly. "Mr. Worthington showed me his ranch yesterday," Eleanor volunteered, running a hand appreciatively over a bolt of calico. "It's quite impressive." Martha's eyebrows lifted slightly. Indeed, most women find it rather austere for their tastes. I found it remarkably practical without sacrificing comfort, Eleanor replied, and the view from the back porch is breathtaking. Hint of approval flickered across Martha's features. James Worthington isn't one for ostentatious displays. That differentiates him from some who found success in cattle. She measured the length of the ribbon with precise movements. Did he show you the entire property? Only the main house and immediate surroundings. There was a boundary dispute requiring his attention, something about the Cooper's cattle. Martha's expression darkened. Hal Cooper's been pushing limits since he arrived last year. Thinks his Georgia breeding entitles him to special consideration. She snipped the ribbon decisively. James won't stand for encroachment, especially on the North Range. That's his best grazing land. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. The upcoming spring social. A new shipment of fabrics expected from Dallas, the difficulties of maintaining proper styling in the Texas heat. Martha gradually revealed more of herself, a widow of 43 who had moved west when her husband's death left her with few options in Virginia, a businesswoman who had built her modest shop through determination and skilled work. It wasn't easy at first, she admitted as they shared tea in the back room. Clearwater wasn't accustomed to a woman running her own establishment. Some suggested I'd be better off remarrying quickly or seeking a position as a housekeeper. But you persisted, Eleanor observed. I had skills and no interest in becoming someone's convenient solution. Martha's direct gaze held Eleanor's. Much like yourself, I imagine. The assessment was perceptive. Despite her decision to become a mail-order bride, Eleanor had always sought independence through her professional abilities. Even now, James's inclusion of a sewing workspace in his home represented an acknowledgement of that core aspect of her identity. May I ask a personal question, Mrs. Harper? Eleanor ventured. Martha, please. And yes, though I reserve the right not to answer. Do you find Clearwater a good place for a woman alone? Truly? Martha considered the question with appropriate seriousness. Better than some places, worse than others. The frontier forces a certain pragmatism. If you contribute something of value, most people eventually look beyond conventional expectations. She added sugar to her tea. That said, it's easier with a man's protection, particularly one as respected as James Worthington. The frank assessment confirmed Eleanor's own observations. Clearwater might whisper about her appearance, might question James's choice, but economic and social realities would eventually favor practical acceptance over sustained rejection, especially if she established herself as a valuable community member. I've been considering offering my services for more specialized garments, Eleanor said, not to compete with your business, but perhaps as a complement. Boston-trained techniques for special occasions, wedding gowns, formal attire, that sort of thing. Martha's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. That could work well for both of us. I focus primarily on practical clothing and basic alterations. More elaborate commissions often go to Dallas, which is a 3-day journey at minimum. By the time Eleanor left the shop 2 hours later, they had established the framework for a potential professional collaboration, one that would allow Eleanor to maintain her skills regardless of her marital status. The arrangement represented more than economic opportunity. It offered a foothold in Clearwater society, independent of her connection to James. Eleanor's next stop was the general store, where she purchased small necessities while observing the interactions around her. The proprietor, Mr. Simmons, was initially stiff but thawed noticeably when she demonstrated knowledge about fabric qualities and household goods. His wife, assisting behind the counter, studied Eleanor with open curiosity, but not unkindness. "You're staying at the hotel?" Mrs. Simmons inquired as she wrapped Eleanor's purchases. "Yes, while becoming acquainted with Clearwater," Eleanor replied, her tone pleasant but not inviting further questions. "Well, Our little town isn't Boston, of course, but we have our charms." Mrs. Simmons lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And James Worthington is certainly foremost among them, if you don't mind my saying so." Eleanor maintained her composure. "Mr. Worthington has been very courteous." "Such a catch," Mrs. Simmons continued, undeterred. "Half the unmarried women in 3 counties have set their caps for him over the years. Even some married ones wouldn't mind a change in circumstances, I'd wager." She laughed at her own impropriety. "Margaret," her husband admonished mildly, "Miss Hayes doesn't need to hear town gossip. It's hardly gossip when everyone knows it." Mrs. Simmons protested, "Especially about Olivia Sutton practically throwing herself at his feet every Sunday after church." Eleanor accepted her wrapped packages with a neutral expression. "Thank you for your assistance, Mrs. Simmons. The items are exactly what I needed." Outside, Eleanor paused on the boardwalk, considering her next move. The mention of Olivia Sutton reminded her of the social currents she was navigating, currents that could become treacherous if she proceeded with marriage to James. Understanding her potential rival seemed prudent. The bank occupied a prominent corner of Clearwater's main street, a solid brick building projecting prosperity and permanence. Eleanor entered with the practical excuse of exchanging a Boston bank draft for local currency, though her actual motive was observation. Inside, high-ceilinged elegance contrasted with the more modest establishments of Clearwater. Polished wood gleamed, brass fixtures shone, and clerks in formal attire attended to customers behind ornate teller windows. At a desk near the rear, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and an imposing bearing conferred with a younger man. Eleanor completed her transaction efficiently, then turned to depart just as a side door opened. Olivia Sutton emerged, resplendent in a fashionable blue walking dress that emphasized her slender waist and delicate features. She was accompanied by an older woman of similar beauty, clearly her mother, bearing the same refined bone structure and graceful carriage. Olivia noticed Eleanor immediately, her perfect features arranging themselves into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Why, Miss Hayes, what a surprise to find you here." Eleanor inclined her head politely. "Miss Sutton, good afternoon." "Mother, this is Miss Eleanor Hayes from Boston," Olivia said, her tone suggesting she was presenting a mildly interesting curiosity. "Miss Hayes is visiting our little town." "How do you do?" Mrs. Sutton acknowledged with the practiced cordiality of long social training. Her assessment of Eleanor was swift and comprehensive, revealing neither approval nor disapproval, merely calculation. "Miss Hayes is James Worthington's guest," Olivia added, the slight emphasis suggesting volumes. "Indeed." Mrs. Sutton's interest visibly sharpened. "How fascinating. Mr. Worthington rarely brings visitors to Clearwater." "I understand you'll be having distinguished guests from Austin soon," Eleanor said, recalling Olivia's dinner invitation. To James. "How exciting for Clearwater." The reference to their previous encounter caused a momentary falter in Olivia's composure. "Yes, Papa regularly hosts important business connections. The railroad commissioner will be joining us, among others." The implied social significance hung in the air, a reminder of the Suttons' position and connections compared to Eleanor's more modest background. It was a subtle but deliberate attempt to establish hierarchy. "How fortunate for Clearwater to have such influential residents," Eleanor replied, her tone pleasant rather than deferential. "If you'll excuse me, I have several errands to complete." She departed with dignity, feeling the Suttons' gazes following her exit. The encounter confirmed what Martha Harper had suggested, and Mrs. Simmons had declared openly. Olivia Sutton had established herself as the presumptive eventual wife of James Worthington, a position Eleanor's arrival directly threatened. The remainder of Eleanor's afternoon included visits to the post office, where she mailed her letter to Boston, the small bookshop, where she purchased a history of Texas ranching, and finally, the church, which stood empty and quiet in the late afternoon sun. Inside, simple wooden pews faced a modest pulpit. Sunlight filtered through plain glass windows, creating pools of golden light on the worn floorboards. Eleanor sat in a back pew, considering the spiritual dimension of her potential new life. In Boston, she had attended services regularly but privately, slipping into rear pews and departing. Before the congregation's socializing began, religion had been a solitary comfort rather than a community connection. Here in Clearwater, church would be unavoidably social, a weekly gathering where her presence beside James would be noted, analyzed, and judged. "Miss Hayes, I don't believe we've been introduced." The voice startled Eleanor from her contemplation. A man of perhaps 50 stood in the center aisle, tall, lean, with kind eyes and a clerical collar. "Reverend Thomas Carroll," he continued, offering his hand. "Welcome to our humble church." "Eleanor Hayes," she replied, shaking his hand. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. The Lord's house welcomes seekers at any hour." He gestured to the pew beside her. "May I?" When Eleanor nodded, he settled beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I understand you're a guest of James Worthington's. He's one of our most dedicated parishioners, though he'd be embarrassed to hear me say so." "Indeed." The information surprised Eleanor, who had not specifically considered James's religious inclinations. "He's funded our new roof, our mission to the Comanche, and 3 years of Sunday school supplies," Reverend Carroll confirmed. "All anonymously, mind you, though in a town this size, such secrets are difficult to maintain." The revelation added another dimension to Eleanor's understanding of James, a man who contributed substantially to causes he valued, but without seeking recognition or social advantage from his generosity. "You're from Boston, I believe," the minister continued. "Yes, I arrived a few days ago." His eyes held no judgment, only gentle interest. "A considerable journey. I hope you're finding Clearwater hospitable." "People have been curious," Eleanor replied diplomatically. Reverend Carroll smiled. "Small towns run on curiosity, I'm afraid. It's both their blessing and their curse. Nothing goes unnoticed, which means no suffering goes unattended, but neither does any deviation from expected patterns." "And I deviate considerably," Eleanor observed, unable to keep a hint of dryness from her tone. The minister studied her thoughtfully. "Perhaps, though I've found that what initially appears as deviation often reveals itself as merely a different expression of the same fundamental human needs for connection, purpose, and love." The simple wisdom in his statement touched Eleanor unexpectedly. "That's a generous perspective, Reverend. Not generous, simply accurate." He rose, straightening his plain black coat. "Our service begins at 10 on Sunday. You would be most welcome, Miss Hayes, as would any questions or concerns you might wish to discuss privately." The offer contained no pressure, merely genuine welcome. Eleanor thanked him, remaining in the quiet church after his departure, considering the various interactions of her day. Martha Harper's practical support, Mrs. Simmons's gossipy but not unkind interest, the Suttons' calculated assessment, and now Reverend Carroll's simple acceptance. Clearwater was revealing itself as a community of contrasts and complexities, not the uniformly judgmental society she had initially perceived. There were potential allies here, as well as obvious obstacles. By the time Eleanor returned to the hotel, the afternoon was waning. She dined alone in the hotel restaurant, ignoring the now familiar stares and whispers with increasing ease. After dinner, she settled in her room with the book on Texas ranching, absorbing information about the industry that formed the foundation of James Worthington's success. 3 days passed in similar fashion. Eleanor established a routine: breakfast in her room, Morning explorations of Clearwater, afternoons spent reading or writing detailed letters to her few friends in Boston, describing her experiences with careful honesty. She visited Martha Harper's shop daily, their professional rapport gradually warming toward genuine friendship. On the fourth morning, a message arrived from James. Eleanor, the boundary matter is resolved for now. I would be pleased to escort you to dinner this evening if convenient. I'll call at the hotel at 6 o'clock. James, the note's brevity matched his direct manner, yet Eleanor found herself reading it multiple times, anticipation warming her more than she had expected. She penned a short acceptance, which the hotel clerk promised to deliver promptly. That evening, Eleanor prepared with particular care, selecting her finest dress, a deep blue silk that she had made herself, its skilled construction minimizing her fuller figure's aspects society deemed problematic, while emphasizing her good posture and clear complexion. She arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, securing it with her mother's tortoiseshell combs, her sole inheritance beyond practical skills. James arrived precisely at 6, his tall figure impressive in a well-tailored dark suit. Something in his expression shifted subtly as Eleanor descended the hotel stairs, a momentary widening of his eyes, a softening around his mouth, quickly controlled, but not before she had registered it. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you." Eleanor noted the evidence of his days away, a freshly healed cut near his temple, skin further weathered by sun and wind. Was the boundary dispute difficult to resolve? Copper can be persuaded through reason or consequence. He initially required the latter before accepting the former. James offered his arm as they exited the hotel. "But that's business. I'm more interested in hearing about your exploration of Clearwater." Rather than the hotel restaurant, he guided her to a smaller establishment at the quieter end of the main street, a Spanish-influenced cafe run by a family from San Antonio. The interior was warm with golden lamplight, red tiles, and the enticing aroma of unfamiliar spices. Once seated at a corner table that afforded relative privacy, James listened attentively as Eleanor recounted her experiences, her budding professional connection with Martha Harper, her encounters with various townspeople, her observation of Clearwater's social dynamics. "You've been thorough in your investigations," he noted, genuine approval in his tone. "Most visitors see only the surface of frontier communities." "I might live here," Eleanor reminded him. "Understanding the deeper current seems prudent," James nodded, a hint of a smile touching his usually serious features. "Precisely why I encouraged your independent exploration. What conclusions have you drawn from your observations?" Eleanor considered the question as their meal arrived, flavorful dishes she had never encountered in Boston, which James explained with evident appreciation for their cultural origins. When she had taken a few appreciative bites, she addressed his question. "Clearwater has sharper divisions than initially apparent," she began. "There's the established hierarchy, the Suttons and their social circle, who seem to consider themselves arbiters of local standards. There are the merchants and professionals like Martha Harper, who command respect through practical contributions. And there are those still establishing their place, newer arrivals, itinerant workers, people with ambiguous standing." "A perceptive analysis," James commented. "And where do I fall in this hierarchy in your assessment?" "You occupy an interesting position," Eleanor replied thoughtfully. "Your economic success commands respect from all quarters. The Sutton Circle clearly considers you one of their own, or at least eligible to join their ranks through suitable marriage. Yet you maintain independence from their social expectations, which both intrigues and frustrates them." James's expression suggested her assessment had struck remarkably close to his own understanding. "And yourself? Where might you fit, should you remain in Clearwater?" The question addressed directly what had hovered unspoken between them since her arrival. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. As your wife, I would occupy a position of material security, but social uncertainty. Some would accept me because of your standing. Others would question your judgment in choosing someone who doesn't meet conventional expectations for a man of your position. A fair assessment, James acknowledged. Does that concern you? Eleanor considered the question carefully before answering. Less than it might have a week ago. I've survived whispers and judgment throughout my adult life, Mr. Worthington. The difference here would be having something substantive beyond mere survival, a genuine purpose, a true partnership, the opportunity to contribute meaningfully. James studied her with that thoughtful intensity she had come to recognize as characteristic. You continue to surprise me, Miss Hayes. Most women in your position would focus primarily on the social challenges. Most women haven't spent their lives navigating a world that judges them primarily on appearance rather than capability, Eleanor replied with quiet dignity. I learned long ago to value substance over social approval. Something warm flickered in James's grey eyes, as did, though through different circumstances. He set down his fork. I encountered Olivia Sutton's father at the bank yesterday. He made it clear, in the indirect way of bankers, that my continued favorable relationship with his institution would be enhanced by more frequent social interactions with his family. Including his daughter, Eleanor observed. Primarily his. A daughter, James confirmed dryly. George Sutton has wanted a business merger through marriage since Olivia returned from finishing school. The arrival of an apparent competitor seems to have accelerated his timeline. The frank discussion of Olivia's matrimonial ambitions might have seemed improper in Boston drawing rooms, but Eleanor found James's directness refreshing. And your response? That my personal arrangements remain private until formally announced, and my banking relationships must be evaluated solely on their financial merits. The hint of steel beneath his measured tone revealed more about his character than any dramatic declaration might have. Their conversation continued through dinner and dessert, ranging from the boundary resolution, which had required James to physically retrieve the trespassing cattle, accompanied by his foreman and several cowboys, to Eleanor's potential collaboration with Martha Harper, which James encouraged with practical suggestions about equipment she might require. Throughout the evening, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to this unusual man, not through conventional romance or flattery, but through the steady revelation of compatible values, mutual respect, and genuine interest in each other's perspectives. He listened when she spoke, considered her opinions as valuable, and shared his thoughts with honest clarity rather than social calculation. As they walked back to the hotel in the gathering dusk, James spoke of plans for spring cattle movement, the expected arrival of new breeding stock from Chicago, his thoughts on expanding the ranch's operations further west, where land remained available. He discussed these matters not as if they were beyond Eleanor's understanding or interest, but as topics naturally shared between potential partners. At the hotel entrance he paused, his expression growing more serious. Eleanor, I've greatly enjoyed our conversations these past days. Your insights, your practical approach to challenges, your evident strength of character, all confirm my initial impression from your letters. Thank you, she replied, noting his use of her given name without the formality of Miss Hayes for the first time outside his written communications. I would like to formalize our arrangement, if you're agreeable, he continued. Not hastily, a proper courtship of several weeks seems appropriate, but with clear intention toward marriage. Before the summer. The directness of the proposal matched everything she had observed about James Worthington. No flowery declarations, no romantic embellishments, simply honest intent expressed clearly. I find that agreeable, Eleanor replied with matching directness. Though I would add one condition. James raised an eyebrow, inviting her to continue. that we proceed with this decision because we genuinely believe in our compatibility as partners, not because it represents the most practical solution to our respective situations. Eleanor held his gaze steadily. I've made compromises throughout my life, Mr. Worthington, but I won't compromise on the fundamental nature of marriage itself. For a moment, James simply looked at her, something like admiration warming his, usually, reserved expression. Then he reached for her hand, holding it with gentle firmness. Eleanor Hayes, I have never proposed marriage as a mere practical solution to you or anyone else. I believe we could build something of genuine value together, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and growing affection. His voice softened slightly on the final words. If that aligns with your understanding, then we have an agreement. The sincerity in his tone, the steady warmth of his hand around hers, the clear-eyed assessment that acknowledged growing affection without exaggerating it into false passion, all confirmed for Eleanor that this unusual courtship had developed into something more meaningful than she had dared to hope when boarding the train in Boston. We have an agreement, she confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotion rising within her. James lifted her hand and with old-fashioned courtesy pressed a brief kiss to her knuckles. Until tomorrow, then. As he departed, Eleanor remained, momentarily on the hotel steps, the Texas evening settling around her with its unfamiliar sense of mesquite and distant cattle, its chorus of unfamiliar insects replacing Boston's urban night sounds. The strangeness of it all struck her suddenly. How far she had traveled, how completely her life had transformed in less than 2 weeks, how uncertain the path ahead remained despite their agreement. Yet underlying these swirling thoughts was a steadying certainty. Whatever challenges awaited, she would face them alongside a man who valued her for precisely the qualities the world had previously overlooked. A man whose direct gaze and thoughtful words suggested not merely practical partnership, but the potential for deeper connection. Eleanor Hayes, once defined primarily by her physical appearance and limited by others' assessment of it, had found unexpected validation in this frontier town. Not from universal acceptance. Olivia Sutton and her circle would certainly escalate their opposition once the engagement became public, but from the one person whose opinion had come to matter most. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Eleanor touched the silver rose brooch at her collar, James's first gift, sent before he had ever seen her. Its significance seemed clearer now, beauty found in unexpected places, resilience amid harsh conditions, worth that transcended superficial assessment. Tomorrow will bring new developments, new challenges. But tonight, Eleanor prepared for sleep with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had taken a significant step toward a future of her own choosing, one that promised not merely security, but genuine respect and growing affection from a man who saw her true value. News of James and Eleanor's understanding spread through Clearwater with the efficiency of a prairie fire. Though they had made no formal announcement, James's daily visits to the hotel, their regular appearances together at restaurants and shops, and his unmistakable attentiveness provided ample evidence for the town's conclusion. James Worthington had chosen his mail-order bride. The reactions varied predictably. Martha Harper offered quiet congratulations and practical advice about establishing a household. Reverend Carroll extended a warm invitation for them to discuss wedding arrangements whenever they felt ready. Mrs. Simmons at the general store fluttered excitedly about dress fabrics and household linens, her gossipy nature transformed to enthusiastic assistance now that Eleanor's position seemed secured. Others responded less favorably. The Sutton circle withdrew into tight-lipped disapproval, their greetings cooling from lukewarm to frigid when Eleanor was encountered on the boardwalks or in shops. Several ranchers' wives, who had previously shown cautious curiosity, now averted, their eyes entirely following Olivia's evident lead in social ostracism. A week after their understanding, James invited Eleanor to accompany him to church on Sunday, a public statement of their relationship more significant than any verbal announcement could have been. As they prepared to leave the hotel that morning, he presented her with a small velvet box. "I thought you might like this for today," he said, his usual directness softened by a hint of uncertainty. Inside lay a ring, not an ostentatious diamond as might have adorned Olivia Sutton's slender hand, but an elegant band of gold supporting a perfect pearl surrounded by tiny sapphires. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said softly, genuinely touched by both the gift and its suitability. A showier ring would have seemed false on her practical hands. This one somehow honored both her substantive nature and feminine appreciation for beauty. "It belonged to my mother," James explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "She was a practical woman who found joy in small refinements rather than grand displays, rather like yourself." The comparison and the insight behind it moved Eleanor deeply. "Thank you for understanding me so well already." "I'm still learning," he replied with characteristic honesty. "But I believe we understand what matters most about each other." The church service that morning was a study in social dynamics. They entered to find the usual congregation already seated: ranchers' families, merchants, townspeople of various standings. Their arrival created a ripple of reaction. Curious glances, approving nods from some, pinched expressions from others, and most notably a frigid glare from Olivia Sutton, seated beside her parents in the front pew. James guided Eleanor to a middle pew, neither claiming prominence nor accepting relegation to the back. His hand rested briefly, supportively, at the small of her back as she seated herself, a gesture not lost on the observant congregation. Reverend Carroll conducted the service with his usual warmth and wisdom, his sermon touching on acceptance, community, and the danger of superficial judgment, points that seemed particularly relevant without being uncomfortably direct. As the congregation rose for the final hymn, Eleanor felt a momentary unity with these people who might become her neighbors and friends, a sense that perhaps acceptance was possible despite initial reactions to her appearance. The illusion shattered during the social gathering that followed on the church lawn. As James briefly stepped away to speak with his foreman about a ranch matter, Olivia Sutton approached, flanked by two women of similar age and equally fashionable attire. "Miss Hayes," Olivia greeted, her voice pitched to carry just far enough for nearby conversations to falter. What a substantial ring, so unlike James's usual refined taste. The deliberate emphasis on substantial left no doubt as to the double meaning. Eleanor maintained her composure, one hand unconsciously touching the pearl ring. "I find it perfectly suits me," she replied evenly. James selected it with characteristic thoughtfulness. Olivia's smile tightened. Of course he would say that. James is unfailingly courteous, especially to those in unfortunate circumstances. One of her companions tittered behind a gloved hand. The other studied Eleanor with the detached fascination one might direct at an unusual specimen in a natural history museum. "He takes his charitable impulses very seriously," Olivia continued, her voice honey-coated with false concern. "Though, in this case, one wonders if he's been entirely fair to you." "Fair?" Eleanor echoed, genuinely puzzled by this approach, "in allowing you to believe this arrangement is permanent." Olivia stepped closer, lowering her voice to a confidential murmur. "You see, James has certain political ambitions. The cattle Ranchers Association has suggested he run for state office next year. Such positions require wives who can manage appropriate social obligations in Austin." The implication hung in the air, clear as crystal. Eleanor was supposedly unsuitable for such a role. The tactic was cleverly cruel, designed to plant seeds of doubt while maintaining a veneer of sympathetic concern. Eleanor met Olivia's calculating Gaze directly. How fortunate, then, that James values substance over shallow social performance. Political success, like ranch management, requires practical partnership rather than mere ornamentation. Color rose in Olivia's perfect cheeks. Before she could respond, a deeper voice interrupted. "Miss Sutton." "Ladies." James had returned, his expression revealing he had grasped the situation immediately. "I see you're becoming better acquainted with my fiancé." The official term, spoken publicly for the first time, silenced Olivia momentarily. She recovered quickly, a practiced smile replacing her momentary discomfiture. "James, we were just discussing the social season in Austin. I was explaining to Miss Hayes how demanding those gatherings can be for someone without experience in such settings." "Indeed," James's tone cooled perceptibly. "Since I have limited interest in Austin society myself, I imagine Eleanor and I will manage quite sufficiently on the rare occasions we choose to attend." He offered his arm to Eleanor with unmistakable finality. "If you'll excuse us, Reverend Carroll is waiting to discuss wedding arrangements." As they walked away, Eleanor released a carefully controlled breath. That was educational. Olivia Sutton is accustomed to achieving her aims through social manipulation, James observed. Finding that ineffective with me has apparently prompted more direct tactics with you. She mentioned political ambitions, Eleanor said carefully. Is that something you're considering? James guided them toward a quieter corner of the churchyard. The Ranchers Association has approached me, yes. I've expressed limited interest thus far, primarily because political life involves exactly the kind of social posturing I find tedious. But it could advance your business interests, Eleanor noted, watching his expression closely, at considerable cost to our privacy and independence. He emphasized the "our" meaningfully. Besides, effective representation of ranching interests requires practical knowledge and integrity, not social connections. If I ever pursue such a position, it would be on those terms. His answer reassured Eleanor, not because she feared inadequacy in political social settings. Her years in Boston had taught her to navigate various social strata when necessary, but because it confirmed again that James valued authentic partnership over conventional appearances. The remainder of the day passed pleasantly, with James taking Eleanor to dinner at the hotel before returning to the ranch with promises to call again on Tuesday. As he departed, Eleanor noticed Olivia Sutton observing from across the street, her expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. Monday morning brought new developments. Eleanor visited Martha Harper's shop to continue their discussion about professional collaboration, only to find the seamstress unusually subdued. Is something wrong? Eleanor inquired as Martha mechanically sorted buttons. Martha hesitated, then sighed. George Sutton visited me yesterday evening. As the building's owner, he informed me that my rent will increase by 30% next month. That's outrageous, Eleanor exclaimed. Is it even legal? Entirely legal, if financially punishing. Martha's expression was grim. It's also clearly a message regarding our association. The Suttons don't appreciate my friendliness toward James Worthington's fiancée. The deliberate economic pressure, targeting not Eleanor directly, but someone who had shown her kindness, revealed a calculated vindictiveness that mere social snubbing had only hinted at. The Suttons were evidently prepared to use their considerable influence to make Eleanor's position in Clearwater untenable. I won't allow my friendship to damage your livelihood, Eleanor said firmly. Perhaps we should reconsider our arrangement and give them exactly what they want. Martha straightened her shoulders. Eleanor Hayes, I've survived a husband's death, a transcontinental journey alone, and establishing a business where women weren't supposed to have financial independence. I won't be bullied by a man who inherited his position rather than earning it. The resolve in Martha's voice matched a growing determination in Eleanor's own heart. This wasn't merely about her personal happiness or even her relationship with James. It represented something larger, the right to be valued for capability rather than appearance, to establish oneself through merit rather than conformity to others' expectations. Then we'll face this together, Eleanor decided, and I believe James should be informed of the Suttons' tactics. When she shared the development with James during his Tuesday visit, his reaction combined anger with strategic calculation. George, Sutton overplayed his hand, he observed, expression grim. Using bank influence to pressure business tenants crosses a line even his social position can't entirely protect. What can be done? Eleanor asked. Several things, beginning with a conversation with Lawrence Jenkins, who sits on the bank's board of directors and has no particular loyalty to Sutton. James's tone remained measured, despite the evident anger beneath. More importantly, Martha Harper's lease can be renegotiated under different ownership. What do you mean? I own several commercial properties in Clearwater through a holding company rather than personally. At Eleanor's surprised expression, he added, diversification is prudent for any business. Martha's building can be acquired fairly easily. I believe the matter-of-fact way he proposed countering the Suttons' machinations, not through social retaliation but practical business strategy, impressed Eleanor deeply. There was no grandstanding, no dramatic confrontation, simply effective action to protect someone who had shown kindness to his fiancée. By Friday, the situation had evolved considerably. Through financial arrangements, Eleanor didn't entirely understand but appreciated. James had quietly negotiated the purchase of Martha's building. The seamstress received not only a renewed lease at her original rate, but options for expanding into the adjacent space if desired. The counter-move was executed with such discreet efficiency that the Suttons didn't immediately recognize they had been outmaneuvered. When understanding finally dawned, it manifested in escalation rather than retreat. Saturday afternoon found Eleanor at the general store, selecting household items in preparation for her eventual move to the ranch. The proprietor, Mr. Simmons, was assisting her when the door opened to admit Olivia Sutton, accompanied by her mother and 3 ladies, Eleanor recognized from church as wives of prominent Clearwater businessmen. Mr. Simmons, Olivia called sweetly, we need to review the arrangements for the Founders' Day celebration. The committee has some concerns about your contribution. The sudden tension in Mr. Simmons's posture told Eleanor volumes about the social dynamics at play. The annual Founders' Day was apparently a significant event, and committee approval could impact a merchant's standing and potentially their business. Of course, Miss Sutton, he replied, casting an apologetic glance toward Eleanor. Just let me finish with, oh, we can wait, Mrs. Sutton interrupted smoothly. Though I'm surprised Miss Hayes is selecting household items already. Usually one waits until wedding arrangements are finalized before such presumptions. The deliberate implication that the wedding might not occur hung in the air like a storm cloud. Eleanor maintained her composure, continuing to examine a set of linen napkins with apparent calm, particularly given certain reconsiderations that might be occurring, one of the other women added meaningfully. Eleanor looked up, meeting Olivia's triumphant gaze directly. Reconsiderations, Mrs. Porter. Well, the woman glanced at Olivia for permission to continue. It's just that James Worthington has always maintained certain standards. The Cattlemen's Association dinner in Dallas next month is quite significant for his business interests. Appearances matter in such settings. The coordinated attack was now clear. They were suggesting James would reconsider their engagement when faced with presenting Eleanor to his business associates at a formal event. It was a calculated strike at her deepest insecurity, that her appearance made her unsuitable as a wife for a man of James's position, despite whatever personal compatibility they had discovered. For a moment, doubt flickered through Eleanor's mind. She had no illusions about society's judgments. She had experienced them throughout her adult life, had seen opportunities and connections evaporate based solely on her failure to meet arbitrary standards of feminine appearance. But something else rose to counter that familiar doubt. The memory of James's steady gaze as he had spoken of valuing substance over surface, his mother's ring on her finger, his efficient action to protect Martha Harper from the Suttons' economic bullying. "Mr. Simmons," Eleanor said calmly, "I'll take the complete set of napkins, please, and the tablecloth we discussed. James particularly admired the craftsmanship when I mentioned it." "Yes, ma'am," the shopkeeper replied, clearly relieved to focus on business rather than social warfare. "You're certainly confident," Olivia observed, her tone sharpening as her strategy failed to produce visible distress. One might even say presumptuous. Eleanor finished her selections with deliberate care before turning to face the group directly. "Miss Sutton, I understand your disappointment. You had certain expectations regarding James Worthington, and my presence has disrupted them. That must be difficult." The directness of the acknowledgement visibly startled Olivia, who had clearly anticipated either defensiveness or retreat. "However," Eleanor continued with quiet dignity, "your disappointment doesn't justify attempting to damage Martha Harper's livelihood or suggesting to Mr. Simmons that his Founders' Day participation might be jeopardized based on his courtesy. To me, such tactics reflect poorly on the very social standing you value so highly." Mrs. Sutton drew herself up indignantly. "Well, the impertinence is perhaps overdue," came a deep voice from the doorway. James Worthington stood there, his tall figure blocking the afternoon sunlight, expression controlled, but eyes hard as flint as he surveyed the gathering. Beside him stood Reverend Carroll, whose usual gentle demeanor had likewise hardened into something more authoritative. "James," Olivia began, quickly composing her features into a beseeching smile, "we were just explaining to your fiancé about the Cattlemen's Association dinner. Such an important event for your business interests." "Indeed." James stepped into the store, moving to stand beside Eleanor. "Then you'll be pleased to know that Eleanor will be accompanying me to that dinner, where I intend to introduce her to my business associates as my wife." The pronouncement silenced even Mrs. Sutton. James continued, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built a ranching empire from nothing. "Our wedding will take place 2 weeks from today. Reverend Carroll has kindly agreed to officiate. We had planned a small private ceremony, but given the evident interest in our arrangements, perhaps a more public event would be appropriate." He turned to Eleanor, his expression softening as he met her gaze. "If that meets with your approval, of course." The question was genuine. Even now, facing down the opposition that had attempted to undermine their relationship, James Worthington maintained his respect for Eleanor's autonomy and preferences. It was this consistent consideration, more than any dramatic defense, that cemented her decision. "2 weeks seems perfect," she replied with equal calm, "though I'll need to accelerate my discussions with Martha about a suitable dress." James nodded, then addressed the now silent group of women. "Ladies, if you'll excuse us, Mr. Simmons, please add Eleanor's purchases to my account." As they departed the store, Reverend Carroll walking beside them, Eleanor felt a curious lightness. Despite the confrontation, or perhaps because of it, the Suttons' opposition had forced a clarification, had transformed what might have remained a pragmatic arrangement into a declarative choice. James Worthington had publicly claimed Eleanor Hayes as his wife-to-be, not with embarrassment or resignation, but with evident pride. "I apologize for accelerating our timeline," James said as they walked toward the hotel. "The situation seemed to warrant decisive action." It did, Eleanor agreed. Though I hope you truly want this advancement of our plans, not merely as a response to opposition. James stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Eleanor, I proposed marriage because I recognized in you qualities I value deeply: intelligence, practical capability, moral courage, and genuine character. The past weeks have only confirmed that assessment. He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. I would be honored to call you my wife in 2 weeks' time, regardless of the Suttons' machinations. Reverend Carroll, who had tactfully fallen a few steps behind, smiled approvingly. I must say, in 20 years of ministry, I've rarely witnessed a couple better suited to face life's challenges together. The minister's endorsement carried weight beyond mere politeness. As a respected moral authority in Clearwater, his evident approval of their match would influence at least some portion of the community. Thank you, Reverend, Eleanor said sincerely. Your support means a great deal. Truth requires no gratitude, my dear. He glanced toward the general store where Olivia and her companions could be seen departing in evident disarray, though it sometimes requires courage to stand against those who confuse social position with moral authority. The remainder of the day passed in practical planning rather than emotional aftermath. James and Eleanor discussed wedding arrangements, with Reverend Carroll settled on the guest list, smaller than might be expected for a man of James's position, but including those who had shown genuine acceptance, and agreed that Eleanor would move to the ranch immediately following the ceremony. When James departed that evening, returning to the ranch to prepare for Eleanor's arrival as his wife, she stood on the hotel steps, watching his tall figure disappear down the darkening street. The confrontation with the Suttons had forced clarity about matters that might otherwise have remained unspoken between them. His pride in presenting her to business associates, his readiness to claim her publicly as his wife, his continued respect for her autonomy even in moments of conflict. Eleanor climbed the stairs to her room with a sense of purpose that transcended the day's discord. In 2 weeks, she would become Mrs. James Worthington, not because she required rescue or security, though the marriage would provide both, but because she had found in this direct, thoughtful man a partner who valued exactly the qualities the world had previously overlooked. There would be further opposition, certainly. The Suttons' social influence extended beyond Clearwater, and their wounded pride would not heal quickly. The Cattlemen's Association dinner would indeed bring scrutiny from business associates who shared conventional expectations about suitable wives for men of James's standing. Yet Eleanor found herself facing these challenges not with dread, but with quiet determination. The woman who had left Boston as a mail-order bride, seeking escape from judgment, had discovered something unexpected in Texas. Not an absence of judgment, but the strength to face it alongside a man who found value precisely where others saw deficiency. She removed her mother's combs from her hair, unpinned the silver rose brooch from her collar, and placed both carefully in her jewelry case beside the pearl ring that now seldom left her finger. 3 symbols of the journey that had brought her here, from solitary survival to chosen partnership, from resignation to determination, from a woman defined by others' assessments to one who had found validation in the eyes of the one person whose opinion truly mattered. In 2 weeks, Eleanor Hayes would become Eleanor Worthington. The whispers of Clearwater would continue for a time, but increasingly they would be drowned out by the steady rhythm of a life built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and deepening affection. A life that would stand as its own best argument against those who had judged her unsuitable based on appearance alone. As Eleanor prepared for sleep, a small smile touched her lips. How fitting that in the wild frontier of Texas, where men were judged by their actions rather than their pedigrees, She had found a man who extended that same practical assessment to her, valuing capability over convention, substance over surface, and the weight of character over the size of its physical vessel. 2 weeks until she would stand beside that man and pledge herself to a partnership built on those principles. The thought brought not nervous anticipation, but calm certainty, the quiet confidence of a woman who had finally found her rightful place. The final preparations for Eleanor and James's wedding transformed the 2 weeks into a whirlwind of activity. Martha Harper, now secure in her shop thanks to James's business intervention, devoted herself to creating a wedding gown that honored Eleanor's fuller figure rather than apologizing for it. The result was a masterpiece of tailoring, pearl grey, silk with insets of antique lace, its elegant lines emphasizing Eleanor's excellent posture and the graceful sweep of her shoulders while cleverly balancing her proportions. "You look magnificent," Martha declared at the final fitting, "not despite your size, but with a presence that commands respect." Eleanor studied her reflection with genuine satisfaction. "You've created something extraordinary, Martha." "The dress merely complements the woman," Martha replied, adjusting the lace at Eleanor's wrist. "James Worthington recognizes quality when he sees it, in cattle, land, and evidently in wives." The wedding day dawned clear and mild. Perfect. Spring weather for the ceremony at Clearwater's church. James had arranged for Eleanor to prepare at his town office rather than the hotel, providing privacy away from curious eyes. Maria Peterson, the foreman's wife, arrived to assist with her preparations, bringing freshly cut wildflowers for her hair. "Ranch women tradition," Maria explained as she wove blue bonnets and white primrose into Eleanor's upswept hair. "Something living from the land you'll call home." The simple gesture, offered with evident sincerity, touched Eleanor deeply. Maria had no social position to gain by befriending her, only the practical frontier woman's appreciation for capable partnership, exactly what Eleanor hoped to establish at Worthington Ranch. When she arrived at the church, Eleanor was surprised to find more attendees than the small gathering they had planned. Word had spread throughout Clearwater and surrounding ranches. Some came from curiosity, certainly, but many offered genuine congratulations as she made her way through the churchyard. Inside, Reverend Carroll waited at the altar beside James, whose tall figure stood even straighter than usual in his formal black suit. His expression as Eleanor walked toward him alone, having no family to give her away, transformed from his usual reserved dignity to something softer, his grey eyes warming with unmistakable admiration. The ceremony itself was brief and unadorned, matching their practical natures. The vows they exchanged focused on partnership, respect, and faithfulness, rather than the more effusive promises often heard in fashionable weddings. When James placed a simple gold band beside the pearl engagement ring, his hands were steady, his voice clear as he spoke the traditional words with sincere intent. After the ceremony, they emerged from the church to find a larger crowd gathered outside. Ranch hands, shopkeepers, townspeople of various stations, even families from outlying homesteads who rarely came to town except for essential supplies. Their presence represented Clearwater's practical acceptance, if not universal enthusiasm, for the unusual match. Notably absent were the Suttons and their immediate circle, though their absence merely highlighted the genuine goodwill of those who had chosen to attend. A reception at the hotel followed, where James and Eleanor received congratulations with equal dignity. He without the awkwardness some had anticipated, she without the desperate gratitude others might have expected. "Mrs. Worthington," James said as they departed the reception several hours later, the address both formal and intimate as he handed her into the carriage that would take them to the ranch. "Welcome home." The simple statement carried weight beyond Its two words, acknowledgement that Eleanor had found her place not merely as James's wife, but as mistress of Worthington Ranch, a position earned through considered choice rather than convenient arrangement. Their arrival at the ranch revealed further evidence of preparation and acceptance. The house had been readied with fresh flowers in every room. The bedroom James had selected for them, a spacious chamber overlooking the eastern pastures, had been arranged with careful attention to comfort and privacy. Most significantly, the sewing room had been fully equipped with materials Eleanor had mentioned in passing conversations, demonstrating both thoughtfulness and respect for her continued professional identity. The staff contributed to these preparations, James explained, as they toured the changes. Maria supervised, but the cowboys brought wildflowers, the cook prepared your favorite dishes for tomorrow, and Lucas ensured everything on the property was in perfect order. They did this for you, Eleanor observed, touched by the evident care. For us, James corrected gently. They respect capability and straightforward dealing. You've demonstrated both. The rest will follow naturally. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered a deeper dimension to their compatibility, a physical harmony that matched their intellectual and practical accord. James approached this aspect of marriage with the same considerate attention he had shown in other matters, neither presuming nor hesitating, simply offering genuine connection that honored rather than disregarded Eleanor's womanhood. The following weeks established rhythms that would define their life together. Eleanor learned the operations of the ranch with characteristic thoroughness, taking responsibility for household accounts, garden planning, and correspondence with suppliers. James included her in business discussions, valuing her practical perspective and keen intelligence. Their partnership faced its most significant public test a month after the wedding. When they traveled to Dallas for the Cattlemen's Association dinner, the event Olivia Sutton had suggested would prove Eleanor unsuitable for James's business interests. Eleanor prepared carefully, working with Martha to create a formal gown in deep burgundy that complemented her coloring and presented her figure to best advantage. She arranged her hair with dignified simplicity, added James's mother's pearl earrings to match her ring, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her worth. The reaction upon their entrance to the hotel ballroom was predictable, curious. Glances, raised eyebrows, whispered comments behind fans and handkerchiefs. The wives of cattle barons and business associates had evidently heard about James Worthington's unusual choice of bride, and many came prepared to find her lacking. What they discovered instead was a woman who moved with surprising grace, despite her size, who conversed intelligently on topics from cattle breeding to financial markets, and most significantly, whose husband treated her with obvious respect rather than embarrassment or condescension. "You've surprised them," James observed, as they took their places for dinner, his hand resting briefly, affectionately on hers. "Not as much as you have," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "They expected you to be apologetic or uncomfortable. Instead, you seem quite content." "More than content," he corrected. "Proud." The simple declaration, spoken without artifice or exaggeration, crystallized what had drawn them together from the beginning, the recognition of genuine value beyond superficial assessment, the appreciation of substance over appearance, the understanding that true partnership required complementary strengths rather than decorative conformity. Throughout the evening, Eleanor engaged with James's business associates and their wives, with neither excessive deference nor defensive pride, simply conducting herself as the capable partner of a successful rancher. By the dinner's conclusion, several influential cattlemen had engaged her in serious conversation about ranch management challenges, while their wives had begun to reconsider their initial judgments. The journey back to Worthington Ranch the following Day brought a sense of quiet triumph, more satisfying than any dramatic vindication could have been. They had faced the scrutiny, endured the initial judgment, and emerged with dignity intact, not by conforming to expectations, but by demonstrating the strength of their unusual but genuine partnership. 6 months after their wedding, the whispers of Clearwater had indeed been silenced, though not in the way most had anticipated. Eleanor Worthington had established herself not merely as James's wife, but as a respected figure in her own right, collaborating with Martha Harper on specialty garments that drew commissions from as far as San Antonio, managing the ranch household with efficient grace during James's business travels, and most recently accepting a position on the town's library committee at Reverend Carroll's request. James, meanwhile, had expanded his cattle operation westward as planned, with Eleanor's practical input informing his business decisions. Their partnership had proven highly effective, with the ranch's prosperity increasing under their joint stewardship. More significantly, their private happiness had deepened into a bond of genuine affection and unwavering respect that was evident to all who encountered them. On a crisp autumn evening, as they sat on the ranch house's broad porch watching sunset paint the hills with golden light, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place of belonging. "A penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Worthington," James said, his voice holding the warmth reserved solely for her. "I was thinking about worth," Eleanor replied. "How differently it's measured depending on who's doing the assessment." James nodded, understanding as always the deeper currents of her thoughts. "And your conclusion?" Eleanor smiled, reaching for his hand with the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark. "That true value is recognized by those capable of seeing beyond surface to substance, that partnership matters more than appearance, and that some treasures remain undiscovered until someone looks with different eyes." James interlaced his fingers with hers, the gesture conveying more than words could express. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with welcoming light. Before them stretched the land they stewarded together. Between them lay the understanding that had transformed a mail-order arrangement into something precious and genuine. A partnership built on recognition of each other's true worth. In Clearwater, the whispers had indeed been silenced, replaced by a different story altogether. How the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties had claimed the most valuable bride of all, not despite her appearance, but because he alone had recognized the treasure others had foolishly overlooked. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.